Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome back to my Saturday Hodgepodge, my weekly wrap-up of all things booktube, reading, whatever the heck else I want to talk about. Today I have something a little bit special planned for my Saturday Hodgepodge because today is my birthday. It's the 55th birthday, and I'm going to do, make a part of this video, something was inspired by a video from Sandy over at Ms. Reads a Lot. She did a video called 50 Favorite Books for 50 Years. So I thought, wow, that's a really great idea. I'm going to do that idea too, but rather than just doing it as a separate video, since today is actually my birthday. Well, actually, you're watching this on my birthday. I'm filming this on Friday before. But since, it is going to actually be my birthday, I thought I would do this and talk about or list my 55 favorite books. And when I mentioned that I was inspired by, to do this video to Sandy, she didn't warn me that you have to make a decision when deciding to make this video. You either get all 55 books, in my case, all 55 books lined up, which I have them. You can't see them all, but they're all lined up on the little workout bench I have in my study here. All 55 books physically talk about, or you have to get 55 image captures of book covers and then insert all of 55 in your editing, which I believe is what Sandy did, even though hers was only 50. I went the other way. So we're going to see how this works out. So what you should know about my 55 favorite books for celebrating my 55th year is that I made this list incredibly quickly. I started off by including nonfiction, and I quickly realized that if I included nonfiction, it would be more like 110 favorite books for 55. And that seemed excessive. I'll wait till I get to be 110. So I limited this to just fiction. These are 55 works of fiction that are my favorite books for 55 years. And the other thing to be aware of is I just kind of got a notepad and I came and I looked at my shelves and I started at the A's and I went all the way down to the bottom. Just whatever struck me as one of my favorite books, I put it on the list until I came up with 55. And since I was pretty careful, I came out pretty close to 55 and only had to eliminate a few. I think what helped is I made a rule for myself that I could not include more than 3 novels by any one author. If you've watched my channel, you know, kind of like a completist about certain authors, and so I've read a lot of their books. So only 3 at most from any one author, and that kind of helped. And there's no sense or logic to this. You may also notice that they're kind of alphabetical because I keep my shelves alphabetically, and like I said, I literally just went down the shelves and wrote book titles down. So I'm going to go ahead and finally get started because apparently I have a tendency to over-explain. Yeah, no joke. So the first book on my list, book number 1, the collected stories of William Trevor. William Trevor is, in my opinion, the greatest short story writer in the history of the English language, and this basically contains all of his stories up to a certain point in his life. I have the other collections of his stories, I believe, that were published after this one was collected, and he's just great. At number 2, by the way, these are not ranked in order. I just picked 55 of my favorite books. At number 2, should be no surprise, The Complete Stories of Ernest Hemingway, the Finkovich edition. I think that Hemingway, probably the greatest American short story writer, I'm going to say, and I think that Hemingway's best work is oftentimes in his short stories. At number 3, I have another book of short stories, and that's 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. I think there's some great stories in here. A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, and one of my favorite short stories, which I featured in a video once, which is For Esme with Love and Squalor, which I think is just a great story. At number 4, At number 4, Persuasion by Jane Austen, by far my favorite Austen, despite the relatively recent, Netflix or Amazon Prime terrible adaptation. At number 5, Another Country by James Baldwin. This is my favorite Baldwin novel. I don't know, of the Baldwin novels I've read, I don't know that any one of them is perfect. But this just has some of the great writing and greatest characters, I think, of any Baldwin novel that I've read. Let's see. At number 6, we finally get to Balzac, Lost Illusions, a story of a young man coming to Paris and being corrupted by Paris society and struggling to find his way. Just kind of a great story. At number 7, Pere Goriot, kind of Balzac's take on the story of King Lear, old Father Goriot and his 3 daughters, various levels of virtue, and also we meet the criminal, the master criminal who appears in Balzac's novel, what is his name? Vautrin is in here, and as well as a lot of other characters. And then my third novel, since I had to limit myself to 3, The Black Sheep, also by Balzac, a story of 2 brothers, one virtuous, one not, and the impact each has on their family. At number, let's see, this would be number 9, Through the Wheat by Thomas Boyd, the greatest World War I novel written by an American soldier who participated in the war. Definitely an American classic and grossly underread. And then at number 10, Milkman by Anna Burns. Just a great story of Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and really one young woman's attempt to disassociate herself from that and from everything else, and to kind of live separately, only to have, you know, the reality of where she lived intrude on her life. And number 11, Underworld by Don DeLillo, kind of, I think, one of the great novels discussing the United States of America, culture, consumerism, Cold War stuff, the isolation, the individual connections between people. Just a great novel by DeLillo, Underworld, my favorite of his works. A recent book I put on my list here, it'd be at number, what is this? Yeah, number 12, At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. This won the International Booker, I think, a couple of years ago. Really incredibly violent, but multi-layered, deep, intricate story of Senegalese soldiers fighting on the Western Front in World War I. On a far lighter note, I kind of like some of the weird juxtapositions of stories of the novels that came out. On an incredibly lighter note is The Van by Robbie Doyle. This is the second, I believe, in what is called the Barrytown trilogy, set in the neighborhoods, I believe, of northern Dublin, and following the Rabbit family. In this one, Mr. Rabbit and his friend, whose name I've just forgotten, Bimbo, buy Mr. Chippy Van and decide to go around selling fish and chips during the World Cup. At number, what am I on here? This should be number 14, The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. This is my favorite of Erdrich's novels, in part because I think it does the best job of showing the blurry lines between reservation life and the way in which the lives of white America and the United States government intrude on the reservations. Brutal story. There's family, there is Native American culture things, there is these kind of cultural conflicts. I just think it's really great. I know not always people's favorite Louise Erdrich book. Another recent book, and one that is on the Booker long list right now, The Trees by Percival Everett. Just, I think, an incredibly great satirical work looking at racism and its impact and its legacy in the United States of America. And I think it's just handled perfectly all the way through. We then get to Faulkner after E. Everett, so I should be on, let's see, I have my list down here. On number 16, William Faulkner's The Sound of the Fury. I think this is my favorite novel, and I've said that. My second favorite, most favorite novel of Faulkner's is Light in August, a really kind of searing and difficult novel, really focusing, I think, on race relations and how race and all kinds of other race and sex are difficult subjects in the South after the Civil War, with the emerging New South and all kinds of changing ideas. And then, you know, these are just favorites, not necessarily what I think are the best novels, but just my favorites. I really like The Unvanquished by William Faulkner, which really was 4 short stories which Faulkner figured out how to tie together to make a novel. Faulkner's really good at kind of figuring out ways to use work he'd already published to shortcut the process of making more books so he could, you know, earn a living and support himself. And The Unvanquished is essentially the story of, again, I think, how the South adjusts after the end of slavery, after the defeat of the Confederacy. I really think it does a great job of looking at that in a way, by the way, which I think is far superior to the way in which Gone with the Wind looks at the same issue. Then I think we are on number 20. The Great Gatsby, I believe, is at number 20, an American classic. I don't think I need to say anything else about that. Was that number 20? No, no, that was 19. So number 20 is Howard's End by Ian Forster, by far my favorite Forster book. It tells the story of the Schlegel sisters, one one more practical, one far more romantic, and I just think a really great story about social class and love and passion, all kinds of things. And it's just a great book. So I think that was number 20. Okay, so here at number 21, you're going to see me begin to cheat. I've included the entire Septology, all 3 volumes of the Septology by Jan Vos, which I've read in the last couple of years. I just think they're beautiful and moving stories of grief and life, and written in an incredibly beautiful way. Just really powerful, great books. Let's see, then I'm cheating again here by including more than one book as one. I've mentioned many times on my channel the Hippo Duology by Sarah Gailey. They write incredibly fun adventure stories. This is the story of an incredibly diverse, violent, ragtag group of adventurers as they travel through Louisiana, a Louisiana in which hippos have been introduced as pack animals and as animals that you ride, and some of them become feral, and all kinds of various stuff happens. Just really fun books. At number 23, The Sun Also Rises. This is my favorite Hemingway novel. Not his best novel, but my favorite. And I would tell you this is the novel which really, I think, for the first time kind of turned me on to literature. You know, Hemingway was my gateway there. The next Hemingway novel is on my list at number 24. Is that right? Yes, is it number 24? And that's A Farewell to Arms. I just think this is Hemingway's best novel. And then I put A Movable Feast on there at 26 because A Movable Feast, I just think is great fun. You know, Hemingway was a horrible friend and really had a lot of biting and mean things to say about authors who he saw as rivals, many of whom were already dead by the time he wrote this book. But it's still great fun and really evocative of the expatriate community of writers and artists in Paris in the 1920s. At 26, I got my numbering is way off. Sandy, you're much better at the numbering than I am. Okay, at 26, I have Leonard and the Hungry Paul by the Northern Irish writer Ronan Hession. This is a really, I think, incredibly compassionate and beautifully constructed and written story about 2 men who are friends, and 2 men who maybe don't fit the mold of society, who end up just really, I think, ending up with happy endings. And that may sound too cheesy. If you haven't read it, you don't know. So, you know, that's a great book. At 27, I have The Known World by Edward P. Jones. This is a really great look, I think, at slavery in the South, written by Jones, and he really kind of turns, I think, that storyline on its head by making the slave owners in this case be former enslaved African Americans themselves, and showing kind of how the system of slavery still corrupts everything about life in the South. I just thought it was a brilliant and great book. Oh, I'm losing my books over here. At 28, Dubliners by James Joyce. I think this is just a really great collection of stories that are somewhat thematically related in the sense that they're all set in Dublin. Araby in here, one of my favorite stories of all time. At 29, I have The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. The story of a road trip by a family, a man, a woman, a son, a daughter, who are kind of a mixed family, a blended family from 2 other families, which really examines issues about, well, it's almost too complicated to go into, about memory, about family, about the dissolution of marriage, about the immigrant experience, about the way in which we treat human beings, humanity, about American history, and dealing with people of different races and backgrounds. It's just a really great book. And then, strangely, again, one of those weird juxtapositions, since this one takes place along the U.S.-Mexico border, I thought it was interesting that the next book on my list here at number, what is this? This would be, this is number 30, is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which is basically his classic story of violence taking place across the U.S.-Mexico border with a group of kind of marauding filibusterers and a great character embodiment of evil, the judge and the kid, and just a great book. And since Blood Meridian is a Western, it should seem appropriate then that Lonesome Dove, the great Western epic, just one of the great, as Greg from Supposedly Fun will tell you, one of the great American novels ever. Lonesome Dove, it's a chunker, but this is not one of those books you are going to have a hard time getting through, I don't think. It's just a brilliant, beautiful book. Then at 32, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. You see my old college, mass market paperback I bought in college, which I've had all that time. Just a great story of Buendia family in Macondo, Garcia Marquez's fictional world in South America. Anyway, just great book. At number 30, what am I on here? 33. Beloved by Toni Morrison, what I think is just the greatest American novel ever written. Two more Morrison novels. Song of Solomon is just a really kind of brilliant, complex, intricate story, sprawling story. It crosses history, which brings up all kinds of issues, not surprisingly, of race and the history treatment of African Americans in the United States, and their efforts to overcome that and live through that. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is on my list here at number 35. This is her debut novel and has to be one of the greatest debut novels ever. At 37, I'm cheating again, and I'm going to put the entire Aubrey Maturin series of historical fiction books set in the British Navy in the late 18th, early 19th century. There are 21 of these books, and I loved every single one of them. At 30, what are we on here? 30, I can't remember my own handwriting. Yeah, at 37, I have In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien, a taut kind of psychological thriller, and I think it's easily Tim O'Brien's best book, and it should be considered an American classic. And then at 38, I have Lot by Shola von Reinhardt. I think just a great kind of dark academia story with all kinds of transgender twists and all kinds of just great weird stuff. Not a perfect novel, but I really did like it. And that brings me to my W.G. Sebald novels. I have 3 on here. Rings of Saturn, organized around essentially our narrator's exploration of the east coast of England, in which it ties together all kinds of elements of history and tragedy and the past and the present in an incredibly, I think, hallucinatory almost kind of construction, which I don't understand. And I'll be honest with you, when I'm talking about W.G. Sebald's books, even though I've read his 4 primary novels and a biography, there are lots of things about his novels that I don't understand. This is true for Austerlitz as well, considered, I think, by most people to be his best book. This kind of follows the life of a man and our narrator's relationship with him, and that man's discovery of his past and how that links to the Holocaust and all kinds of just incredibly brilliant linkages and connections. By the way, Sebald's books oftentimes come with black and white pictures, which seem to have something to do with the story, but are oftentimes not what they actually came to be pictures of. And then the last Sebald I have on my list is The Immigrants, which is essentially focused on the lives of, I believe, 4 Jewish people who are referred to as the immigrants here, who are displaced temporarily by the Holocaust, and their lives are upset by that. Even though the Holocaust is not directly addressed here, it does kind of show how that affected their lives and how things played out. Again, that's just a basic structure of around which the novel is written. It's far more complex and beautiful than that. Speaking of something I consider to be complex, that's Nupamine by Leanne Beda Simpson. This was my favorite book from last year. It is a look at essentially Indigenous Canadian culture and their attempt to blend with the modern world while holding on to traditional values. It is unique, unapologetically Indigenous American. I just thought it was brilliant. Somewhat strangely, I think another weird juxtaposition after that, I have the Patrick Melrose novels by Edward St. Aubin. I just think these are incredibly beautifully written satire about kind of modern society and people with a certain amount of wealth in modern society. There's drug addiction, there's trigger warning, I guess, sexual assault. There are ruptured and terrible relationships, fractured and damaged people. Just, you know, that doesn't make it enjoyable, but somehow reading the books is an incredibly enjoyable experience. After that, where am I on my numbers? I stopped counting, didn't I? I did. So at number 45, I have Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, possibly, you know, one of the great adventure stories of all time, you know, with with Long John Silver and Treasure, anyway, all that kind of stuff. I think this is my second dark academia book, and that is maybe the ultimate example of that in recent American history, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I don't think this is a perfect novel, but I really, really enjoyed reading it. I really, really enjoyed kind of thinking to myself, is this story even real? And thinking through all the things and trying to put pieces together that are not necessarily probably the pieces the author intended for me to put together. Let's see, then we get to, where am I? Oh, then we get to William Trevor. Trevor's also a novelist as well as the greatest short story writer ever in English. My favorite novel of his, novella, is Reading Turgenev, which is just beautiful and sad and powerful. I think I could say the exact same thing about all of Trevor's novels. The next Trevor novel on my list is the story of Lucy Galt, the story of a young woman who becomes separated from her family in a really weird way, which is not necessarily always believable. By the way, you should know something, I think, about Trevor's novels. There always seems to be this little element of almost, I'm not going to call it a magical thing, but this element of something strange happening, which then kind of sets everything else in motion. And this is a really kind of beautiful story about people who lose touch with one another and trying to mend those relationships. And the last William Trevor novel I mentioned here is, and this is going to be, well, let's see, this is number 49, The Silence in the Garden, kind of a powerful story about family and cruelty and the long-lasting effects of even childhood cruelty, which then brings me to my last 10. At number 50, I have Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. I just thought this was wonderful and funny and brilliant and satirical and evocative of the time period, and just so far for the Trollope books I've read, this is my favorite. Then I have Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmond Ward at number 51. Really a story of the damage that poverty and racism can do. Within poverty, racism, drug addiction, the impact they can have, or they do have, on African American families. So at number 52, I have Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This is my favorite Colson Whitehead novel, and essentially is a novel in which the Underground Railroad is imagined as a real train, which takes its primary passenger through the history of race relations and racial violence of white America towards African Americans. One of the greatest novels of all time is at number 53, and that's Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I think it's the greatest example of stream of consciousness writing that came from the modernist period. Then let's see, at number 53, I have the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You'll notice I'm cheating again. I have to hold these up really carefully. I've shown these before. These are my 1978 box edition mass market paperbacks by Ballantine Books, I believe. And you can see how much I read them and how weather-beaten they are. The greatest work of high fantasy ever written, or at least written in English. And then on top of that, then at 54, I have The Hobbit. And then the last story I have, one of my favorite novels of 55 novels in 55 years, is Elmore Leonard's Get Shorty, the story of Chili Palmer and his kind of travels from being a small-time Florida gangster to being a slightly less small-time movie-making Hollywood gangster. Elmore Leonard writes great dialogue, great books. He is underappreciated. Anyway, there you go. There is my attempt to do what Sandy did in her video and do my 55 favorite books for 55 years. Whew, now I am surrounded by piles of books and I have to put all these back on the shelf. But in addition to that, I also want to talk about what I've been reading. As if those 55 books weren't enough, let me talk about 5 more books here. This month is Women in Translation Reading Month, and so I have been reading for that. I finished 2 of my Women in Translation Month books. The first was Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami, and I'll be honest with you, this book I'm still thinking about. This book involves a woman who is in her late 30s, who is alone, frequents bars, drinks heavily, and when she's at a bar, she meets up with a man who had been one of her teachers when she was in high school, and they form, I think, what has to be one of the strangest and I think unsettling relationships ever. The blurb on the front says, "I'm hooked on this sentimental novel about the friendship between a Tokyo woman in her late 30s and her old high school teacher." So one of the things about this book that I find unsettling, and unsettling in a good way, is that the woman who is the main character in the story refers to herself. At one point in the novel she says that she was a mature child but an immature adult. That she matured quickly as a child, but then at some point she just stopped and she kind of became fixed in her personality, at least, in her approach to life, her outlook on things, in this kind of almost childlike way. And this is then, I think we can infer, has caused her to be largely alone, to not really be connected with the people she works with, to not really have a lot of human connections. And perhaps that's why she drinks so much, and perhaps that's why she, when she does meet her old teacher, she kind of almost desperately clings to him and wants, all the things she's been missing from him. And that to me is unsettling. She refers to the teacher, who eventually in a sense becomes her lover, as sensei. She literally calls him teacher, and he refers to her by her last name, as he might have in school throughout the story. And she frequently she follows him around from one thing to another, doing what he does occasionally, even though there are moments when she rebels against that, like a teenager would. She follows him around from one thing to another, and invariably at some point she asks herself, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? But in the end, they do kind of form an actual relationship, and I won't give away the ending, but I'm not exactly sure that we should applaud the creation of that relationship. Anyway, I really, really liked it, and I would highly recommend it. I also finished this week Elena Knows by Claudia Peneiro. This is one of those novels that a lot of people here in our part of BookTube have read. I think it is brilliantly written novel. It's our main character, Elena, has Parkinson's, and such severe Parkinson's that she can only move once her medication is kicked in. And we see this kind of brilliant, I think, depiction of her disability, of her disease and its progress in her body. And as other people have said, that literally she has to think about how to get started walking. And time has no meaning for her other than knowing when she can take her next pill. And Elena's daughter has been found dead, hanging by a rope in the belfry of the church she attended. It's been ruled a suicide. Elena believes that it's not. And she goes off essentially on an adventure to try to find someone who will act as her body, somebody who's physically able to go to the police and track down clues, because she's desperate to prove that her daughter didn't commit suicide. And it's at that point that things kind of come off the rails for Elena. There is some social... Now, I have to say, before I move on, I didn't like this novel, particularly its conclusion, nearly as much as I think lots of other people did. I found the social issue that it tries to address to be addressed a little bit heavy-handedly, a little bit obviously, and also then in a way which is not satisfying. Now, I can't tell you what that social situation is, what that social issue is. I can't really make comments about the commentary I think this book makes on it without giving away spoilers, and I don't want to do that. But what I will say is it calls into question our relationships, primarily here in the book, focused on the relationship between mothers and daughters and what each one owes the other. and whether or not a person has to sacrifice their life, their future happiness, for one or the other. And it really is good, but there were just some things about it that I thought were just shortcuts and slightly skirted the issue, where if they'd been addressed more directly, I think it would have been better. Also then, for Women in Translation Month, I have been reading The Years by Ernaux, which is kind of a memoir, maybe. I have some real questions about this, but to me the book is about memory and how we are preserved in our own memory, and how that preservation of ourselves in our own memory will only last as long as we're around, unless perhaps if we write a book. Now, I'm planning on, and this is inspired another one of those random thoughts things, so when I finish the book, I'll plan a random thought Thursday video around this, and that might be the last random thought Thursday, but I am enjoying this. I'm supposed to be reading The Mansion by William Faulkner. Faulkner in August. This year we've been reading the Snow trilogy. This is the third one for August, and I'm having a really difficult time getting started. Every time I pick it up, I think, I'd rather read something else. And then I've also kind of slowed down in my reading of Africa's World War, Congo, the Rwandan Genocide, and the Making of Continental Catastrophe by Gerard Prunier. Just a brilliant work of history by a journalist, I believe, heavily documented, somebody who knows everything, but it is dense reading. And I've been kind of feeling reading slumpy this month and last, and so I haven't gotten through that yet, but I intend to. All right, so as if that weren't all enough, and this video weren't already going on something like 30 or 40 minutes, also kind of inspired by this discussion about memory and my 55th birthday, I was thinking to myself, what is the perfect 80s song? And so I thought what I would try to do is make a contest here on my channel for us to pick the perfect 80s song. Now, you don't have to be alive in the 80s to participate, but what I want you to do is I want you to nominate in the comment section below. I want you to nominate what you think the perfect 80s song is. Now, by this I don't mean the greatest 80s song, the most popular 80s song. I mean the 80s song whose sound, whose music is most evocative to you of the 1980s. Now, I have two choices here. I'm going to nominate two. I'm going to put two nominees out there right away. And one would be Stop the World and Melt With You by Modern English. That just has that kind of new wave, English accented singing, goofy lyrics, 80s kind of sounding synthesizer guitar mix, which I just think screams the 80s. And then another song I think I mentioned here before, which is Pat Travers' La 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 Love You, which I think literally contains every kind of musical interlude that existed in any 80s song is somewhere in that Pat Travers song, including distinct 80s hard rock guitar sound mixed with synthesizer sounds, mixed with weird transitions from one piece of music to another, strange bridges, and just goofy, weird lyrics. Anyway, so there you go. Those are my two nominees. Please list your nominees down below. If I get enough nominees, what I'll start doing is I'll post on my community tab a poll where I'll just pair up two songs against one another, and then we'll slowly narrow it down until we get the ultimate 80s song. That's my plan anyway. We'll see how that goes. So I've talked enough. As always, thank you for watching, and I look forward to your comments in the comment section below. Sheesh.